Ms. Henriquez, hello. Welcome to the MegaCast.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for joining us today. You know, we're just one big community, all of this thing together, trying to figure out what's going on, and housing is an issue everywhere. It doesn't matter whether you're in Oakland County, Wayne County, up north. It's a big issue for all of us here in Michigan. In normal times, what does the Detroit Housing Commission do?
Well, in normal times and in these times, we house the most economically challenged families and seniors in our community. Our housing is income-based. The rent is based on your income, and so as your rent, your income increases, your rent goes up. But if you're in a time like this, when you're losing jobs and other benefits are cut, we're able to then readjust your rent, and your rent can go down. So it's still always affordable housing in the long term.
Just thank you for your great work. Think of the people that would be on the streets of the city of Detroit and Wayne County had your services not been there. You must be just helping a ton of people have a roof over their head in our area.
Yeah, we're trying. The Detroit Housing Commission is the largest in Michigan, although there are lots and lots of other housing commissions across Michigan who are doing the same sorts of good work. And so I think while we get to be the largest, we're not the only ones doing this kind of work, community after community across the state. So we're probably housing about 4 or 5% of the city of Detroit's population, about 3,600 public housing units, and then we've got about 5,000 to 5,500 Section 8 vouchers as well.
Sandra Henriquez is joining us, the Executive Director of the Detroit Housing Commission. Are there housing commissions in municipalities around the state? Are they serving counties, or how does that generally work?
You have a little of both. And it varies from state to state, but generally every city and or town in Michigan or across the nation that has applied for public housing grant years and years ago when the program first started, is able to set up a commission or a housing authority in its jurisdiction. And then each state generally has a state housing finance agency. In this case, it's the Michigan State Development Authority, MISTA, and they too, while they finance permanent housing and multifamily housing, issue tax credits for the building of affordable housing, they also have the largest state housing choice voucher or Section 8 program in Michigan at about 28,000 units.
So good news for you. That's what we have here to talk about today. U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, otherwise known as HUD, recently distributed nearly $11 million for public housing programs here in Michigan. I know you probably could have used more, but does that money help, and where's that money going?
That money always helps. So $11 million came to Michigan. Detroit got about $2.4 million of that. We do expect over time that there may be even more money coming to local housing commissions, and that is to supplement the operations that we currently do, and it's also to provide additional money for COVID-19 related expenses. And so every housing authority has stepped up its cleaning protocols, particularly in its high-touch areas, making sure that those surfaces are disinfected. We've been building and will build as we continue to look toward opening up more of our business and having more interaction directly with our constituents and our customers. Retrofitting our offices, for example, and so that we can maintain the social distancing. It allows us to buy the kinds of computers or technology or other instruments that we need in order to do this new normal, is what people, I guess, are going to call it, whether we need new technology so people can work remotely more comfortably, whether we need to think about new business processes so that we can limit the kind of one-to-one interaction so that we can still carry on business, people can pay their rent, people can have their rent adjusted, people can have their units inspected, we can do all our normal business that we have to do and comply with state and federal guidelines in running our housing. But how do we do that in a way that is 21st century, new technology, new processes? And so this is maybe in some ways a silver lining, because it gets us to look at how we do our operations and how to do them better.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. Sandra Henriquez is joining us here, Executive Director of the Detroit Housing Commission. I appreciate you saying that, Sandra, because that's really the theme across almost everyone we talk to, across all sectors, public sector, private sector, people living in their own home. We all have to pivot. We all have to adjust, figure out what that new normal is, and operate in a different way. And yeah, it's been painful, but along the way we're learning some things too. So that's the good news. The Detroit Housing Commission, are you helping in addition to, I'm sure, having facilities? Do you help people that are behind in their rent and help them with their funding for rent if they can't afford it in programs like that?
No, we do not. The regulatory and statutory environment we work under on the federal level in particular, we do services and provide those kinds of services for residents and applicants who are participants in our Housing Choice Voucher Program or our Public Housing Rental Assistance Program. People who need other assistance who are in private housing that is not subsidized probably need to look to their local governments to use other federal funds for those kinds of programs, both at the state and the city municipal level.
We obviously know that the problem with COVID-19 is particularly acute in communities of color. It's been very well documented. Is housing a component of that? People that may not have the housing they need, and for those of us that get to go home to a meal and a dry, safe place every night, we're in a different place. Is the housing component part of this whole problem?
The lack of affordable housing is a problem, whether we're in a pandemic or not. At least a decade or more ago, there was definitely a connection made between housing and health. So you'll see some housing first models for homeless populations getting people into shelter, and so that they can stabilize themselves and their health situations, and the savings that accrue both to the emergency room hospital networks, as well as just in terms of people's own health and morbidity and how they improve once their housing has been stabilized. Here, during a pandemic, it's incredibly important that people have individual apartments, so people need to quarantine because they've been exposed or that they've been tested positive and they can isolate. Having your own apartment that you can go into, close the door, and get services delivered to you for food, medication, those kinds of things, without having to expose other people is really important. And you'll see that, I think, over time, as more and more people get their housing stabilized and the healthcare system is able to respond, I think we'll find that people, through all of these mechanisms of social distancing, of having decent, safe, affordable housing in which to live, will go a long way in having people stay as safe as possible and to decrease the spread of the virus.
Well, I appreciate you coming on the show today, Sandra Henriquez, Executive Director of the Detroit Housing Commission. There's a lot of us that are complaining and whining and crying about, not wanting to stay at home, and it's just good to take a couple of minutes and think about the stay-at-home order, and then just imagine for a moment you're living in the stay-at-home order and you don't have a home, right? So you're just naturally going to be more exposed. I know you're doing a great job. I have the pleasure of working with some organizations that also help. My good friend Mitch Album, it's just so great to work on his charities because, he's helping, getting people in houses. Maybe it's only a couple of families every year, but every little bit helps. It's a whole community all coming together and working on things. Is there anything else that we could do to help, or anything else that we should know about as we try to do as individuals anything we can to help folks that don't have some place to go home to at night?
I think there are a couple of things I'd like to leave you with. One is that as we've had stay-at-home orders, there are people, not just the doctors and the nurses and bus drivers and grocers who are on the front lines, but at public housing authorities and housing commissions across Michigan and across the nation, we've been deemed as critical infrastructure workers as well. I have men and women who are out every day at housing developments and doing property management, but working to keep themselves safe, but more importantly, to keep our residents safe. And so they've gone to work every single day during this crisis, leaving their own families at home, and coming to work in service of others. And I think that they too need to be commended as much as anybody else who's been able to work every day through this crisis that we're in. Number two, I would say that the more people understand the connection between housing and health, the better off we'll be, and that the issues about affordability and demand and the creation of more housing will go a long way, not just now during this pandemic, but will go a long way for decades and decades and future generations to come if we can appropriately house people at a price point that they can afford, so that they can then build the rest of their lives and get into the world of work, or get a promotion, or get better education for themselves and for their children. And so it's not just this is only for poor people program. This is for all people, because we will then lift all the votes. And the third thing I'd like to say, I think, in closing, would be that as we come through this, it is important for people to understand that housing is also an economic generator, particularly in our housing choice voucher, formerly known as the Section 8 program. We have private landlords who have their homes. They rent them out to voucher holders. That enables them to pay mortgages and property taxes, which keep city and state governments going. And so it's a very symbiotic process here that's in place. And people should not forget the importance of those housing subsidies and the larger role they ultimately play in government across this nation.
Well, Sandra, thank you very much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. Sandra Henriquez, Executive Director of the Detroit Housing Commission, and giving us some insight into where some of this $11 million that's coming to the state of Michigan from the federal government, from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, is being spent, and some of the good work going on. Sandra, thank you very much. Let's keep in touch, and any message that needs to get out to the Metro Detroit area, or at least our little slice of it, we welcome your visit.
Thank you, and I thank you for having me today.
Sandra,
stay healthy, everybody.
You too. Stay safe. Sandra Henriquez joining us.